Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining Stony Progressive. Um, gonna be doing a standard Saturday night here. News wrap up, protest wrap up. A lot of Ukraine talk, of course. Gonna try to debunk some Main Street bullcrap with some general information. But thanks for joining us, Stony Progressive. I got my fresh bowl packed for the opening credits, as I would like to say, or our chill sesh. This is the Jen Psaki goodbye week. So, with that being said, we are going to start out with the fresh packed bowl and some Jen Psaki. She should be done this week, I believe. So, no more Jen. We'll take a break from the White House after Jen leaves. But until Jen leaves, we gotta enjoy it while we have it, right? I miss Sean Spicer. I'm probably gonna miss Jen. So, let's smoke a bowl. Catch up on some news. See what's happening around the world, guys. Let's stay woke, huh? Stay baked and stay woke. All right, let's get stony.
With that, Zeke.
Thanks, Jen. You just mentioned that COVID isn't over. We just saw the president give his remarks to a very large crowd indoors. I was hoping you'd speak a little bit to how the president views sort of when it is safer to be going to such large gatherings. Is that sort of thing that he's trying to model for the rest of the American public, that the risks for most people from COVID now are lesser than they were a year or two ago before vaccines and treatments? Is that sort of behavior now, it's not something that should be stigmatized or and should be embraced?
Sure. I think what the president is doing is he is following CDC protocols and models, and that's exactly what we would recommend the rest of the country do. That includes getting vaccinated, getting boosted, getting an extra booster if you were eligible, as the president did just last week, and obviously taking any steps or precautions that the CDC recommends to keep yourself safe. And obviously in Washington, D.C., we remain in a yellow zone, and the president follows those protocols as needed.
And just to update, did you say when the last time the president tested for COVID?
I suspected you would ask this. I've asked this question, and I will get you an answer to that as soon as possible.
Again, this is from Wednesday. Yesterday we did Thursday and Fridays. Today we'll be doing Wednesdays, Jen, just as a warm up to get ready for the real politics of the day. Oh, her answers just crack me up.
As you know, he has a regular testing cadence, is usually tested a couple times a week. We will venture to get you that as soon as possible after the briefing.
And on a different topic, the U.S. today sanctioned a number of Russians, including Vladimir Putin's daughters, as well as some other senior officials. I was hoping you'd like to speak a little bit about sort of the administration's thinking about when are family members of Russian oligarchs and Russian government officials sort of fair game for sanctions, and how you've weighed, you've described the distinction between minors and adults in this case, with sort of, collective punishment or trying to prevent them from harboring assets with, people who are not necessarily involved in the decision making in Ukraine that sort of maybe benefit from them.
Well, we've seen a pattern over time of President Putin and Russian oligarchs stash assets and resources in the bank accounts and of their family members.
Oh, like just every other oligarch on the planet. Seriously, oh my goodness. It's called being rich, and you never want to be so rich so that you have to spread around with your family. It's pretty basic. Not really sure what she's talking about.
And so this was an effort to get at those assets, and that's why these individuals were sanctioned.
But
Ah, yes. Individuals are sanctioned as children because they have trust funds. Man, I'm glad they don't do that to us. Someday soon.
why the distinction then between minors and adults?
Well, again, we look at where assets may be stored and stashed and make a decision and an assessment on what's appropriate. Go ahead.
The New York Times has a verified video that appears to show a group of Ukrainian soldiers killing captured Russian troops outside a village just west of Kyiv. Has the White House seen these videos? Do you have a response? Is this something you're investigating?
I have seen the video. I don't have any confirmation or validation of the video or the report.
And so far, the administration, or the U.S. has spent about $2 billion since the beginning of this invasion. Obviously, you've said the U.S. is committed to doing everything it can to help Ukraine in this fight. But if General Milley is correct in what he said yesterday, that this really could go on for several years, are these numbers sustainable over the long term? Can you keep up at this pace?
Well, I would say, just to reiterate what General Milley said, and the president has also been clear, that there are
Thanks for the follow, Dan Collins. We're smoking a little and catching up on some, saying goodbye to Jen, her farewell tour. But I'll smoke one to that. Cheers.
tough days ahead for the Ukrainian people. There's a likely scenario where this could go on for some time, and even as they have moved their forces and they've retreated from Kyiv, they retreated from the north and the west, and they're consolidating forces in the east and in the Donbass. We've warned a phase of the conflict for some time. It doesn't mean it will look exactly the same, or the needs or the resources will be exactly the same, and that is something we will continue to assess in our conversations with the Ukrainians, as well as with our allies and partners around the world. And right now, just to note, obviously our focus is on amping up and providing a range of military assistance. The $100 million for Javelins is a good example of that, as they earn an active fight every single day against the Russian military. Also humanitarian and economic assistance, and there will be different needs that will come about over the course of time. And that's something we are, of course, committed to continuing to support, their recovery from this, their continued fight from this. But I can't make an assessment about sustaining, because obviously this war and the needs will change over the course of time.
If this is a really protracted, prolonged conflict, given what the Treasury Secretary said today, sort of warning of the enormous economic repercussions of this war for the whole world, what does this mean for the economy in the U.S. for the next year or two? Can you just give us sort of a big picture of what Americans should be bracing for?
Well, as we've made decisions about...
This is my last bowl of cherry punch. Some good shit. Be moving on to the White 99. Some White Rhino mix.
Putting sanctions in place. We've continued to do that through the prism of maximizing the impact on Russia and the Russian economy while minimizing the impact on the West and the United States. Obviously, there are areas where there has been an impact, including on the price of gas, and you saw the Federal Reserve convey today the impact of the Russian invasion on inflation. And we know...
Ah, yes, it's inflation, not record profits for corporations everywhere. Everywhere. It's inflation. Not a calculated effort to fuck us. She's a good liar. She's gonna earn her keep at MSNBC.
That to be the case. But what we're trying to do is mitigate those impacts. And obviously, not just the announcement of the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but the announcement by the IEA today is the largest release that they have ever done in history. And all of these are part of our collective effort to mitigate the impacts on the American people over the course of time. Even the length of time of the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, meant to be a stopgap measure or kind of a bridge measure to get to the point where oil companies could produce more, is intended to have a mitigation impact over the course of time. So what we're doing is anticipating and trying to take steps to reduce the impact on the American people over time.
Following up on that IEA question, do you have a detail or figure of how much oil has been released of the 180 million barrels to date?
I'm happy to get that for you. I'm sure that our team may have that, but I don't have that in front of me.
Can I ask, President Biden today told union members, Amazon, here we come. Was he endorsing the efforts of workers at Amazon facilities?
What he was not doing is sending a message that he or the U.S. government would be directly involved in any of these efforts or take any direct action. What he was conveying is his longtime support for collective bargaining, for the rights of workers to organize, and their decision to do exactly that in this case, something that he has long supported broadly over the course of his career. Go ahead.
Just back to the issue of the sanctions that are being imposed on Putin's children, obviously sanctions.
All sanctions are a form of war, and sanctioning individuals that are billionaires is completely just politics.
sanctions against him as well.
She's usually pretty good with her questions. I got to give her credit. She's usually pretty solid.
Does the U.S. have a rough estimate at this moment in time of how much of his assets are tied up versus what he still might have access to?
I don't have an assessment to offer from here on that. But we know that we've seen attempts and efforts to stash assets in the accounts and resources of his children.
A senior administration official earlier today was raising the question of Putin's endgame, that at some point he would presumably recognize that this war has been a failure for him. Given some of the scenes that we're seeing in places like Bucha and Mariupol, does the U.S. believe that he is any closer to realizing that reality today versus a week ago, a month ago?
Well, remember, the scenes we're seeing in Bucha are from events and atrocities that didn't happen yesterday. They happened some time ago, right? And there will be more of those, which our Secretary of State and our National Security Advisor have also predicted, unfortunately, because there are a lot of areas of the country where Russia has invaded and committed atrocities, no doubt, which we have not yet had visual access to. I would say that I can't make an assessment for you from here on what is in President Putin's mind. What we do know is that because...
Oh, she loves saying that. She absolutely loves saying, "I can't tell you what the Russians are thinking. I can't tell you how the Russians are going to vote. I'm not going to tell you what Putin is thinking." Nobody fucking asked you to. No one once asked you, "What do you think Putin?" Like, no one asked you to be the Russian strategist. Like,
of the impact of the economic sanctions, including the ones we have taken today and steps we've taken over the course of time, we have seen an unquestionable significant impact on Russia's economy. And that has led to this question now, as a result of the decision around whether or not they would be able to make a bond payment earlier this week, that they will have to decide whether they are going to spend down dollars and resources they have to avoid default, or whether they're going to continue to spend that money in funding the war. And that is a part.
MMT, man. Oh, MMT. Like, it's all a facade, right? Like, massive governments don't have to, like, default on, like, we're not going to default on our loans to the Chinese government or to the Fed, right? They can keep printing money. The Russians they have resources. They can keep making things.
Part of our objective is to force them into a place where they are making that decision. But we've seen Russia's economy collapse by 15%, wiping out the gains it made in the last 15 years. Inflation is spiking up to 15%. Russia is set to lose its status as a major economy. And our objective is to implement those consequences, to make it much more difficult for President Putin to fund the war, and we're seeing the direct impacts of that already, and to make it clear that this was a strategic blunder. And we're already seeing those impacts on the economy. How that impacts him, and that is not something I can predict in terms of getting into his mind.
What is the administration's current assessment of what Putin's endgame is? And does the administration believe that that may have shifted since the beginning of the invasion?
Well, I would say that, one, while they have moved their troops around and repositioned, we have not made, and they haven't made many airstrikes in the last 24 hours, according to the Department of Defense and their briefing, which you may have seen, or their backgrounder. We also know that their goal remains weakening Ukraine as much as possible. And we should be under no illusion that that objective hasn't changed, even as their tactics have changed. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. The president today, as he was talking about his vow to stand by Ukrainians, added a line, and by the way, if I've got to go to war, I'm going with you guys. Can you clarify what that meant?
There's no intention of sending troops to the ground or fighting a war with the U.S. forces against Russia. That was a reflection of his long love for labor unions and members of labor unions and the building and trades workers who were there and people that he would always love to be in the foxhole with, not an indication of a change in U.S. policy.
He also referred to that heated exchange we saw that involved Secretary Austin, and he said, with regard to Ukrainian troops, we've trained them and we've given them the weapons. Can you clarify what he meant by we have trained them? What training was he talking
Well,
about?
there was some time ago.
Oh, that's a fantastic answer. There was some time ago. I think if she just left it there, I would be so happy.
Training, and we have provided them obviously a range of weapons over time. What point he was making is one Secretary Austin made yesterday. Without the extensive military assistance that we have been providing the Ukrainians, the security assistance, over the course of the last several weeks and even months before that, $1.6 billion worth, maybe a little higher now after the 100 million last night, they would not have been able to effectively fight back as they have. And how it has basically worked is they have requested a range of assistance. We go through and see what we are able to provide. We often work with partners and allies to provide assistance we don't have access to here, and then we expedite the delivery of that over the course of time, whether that is javelins, stingers, or a range of materials that the U.S. military has determined they're not only trained on, but has been effective in fighting this war.
Aside from the physical resources, what training was he talking about? What was the latest training the U.S. troops have done?
There's not new training to report out to you. What he was really emphasizing, and the important part here, is what Secretary Austin was also talking about, is the military equipment that has been provided that has allowed them to fight this war.
And one more
Yeah.
on sanctions. You've said a couple times now that, the U.S. sanctioned Putin's daughters because there's reason to believe Putin has stashed his wealth with them. Does that mean that the U.S. has some information about where the billionaire daughters are stashing their wealth?
I don't have any more to provide to you from here. We make assessments about where to implement financial sanctions to
That was
get
pretty
close
fucking
to not
funny.
only the assets of President Putin, but those around him. And we have seen a long pattern of using relatives and family members to stash wealth. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. First, on immigration.
Man, are they calling the kettle black right there? Like, that seems like the ultimate kettle calling the pot black. Whatever it is, I don't even care. It's freaking. Bidens are very rich. They have been slushing money around. They've been hiding money, and that is what they do. So that is ridiculous.
Our team Texas is saying that you guys are starting to give smartphones.
Oh, and his face punch. Face punch is gonna talk today. Yes, we love it when face punch talks. Look at his stupid face. It's so punchable.
border crossers, hoping that they'll use the phones to check in or to be tracked. Which part of that is supposed to deter people from crossing illegally into the states?
Well, I think you of all people, since you've asked me a range of questions on this topic over time, would recognize that we need to take steps to ensure that we know where individuals are and we can track and we can check in with them. The Alternatives to Detention program is just what we utilize, has 3 unique forms of technology to monitor participants enrolled in the program. Telephonic, this is one of them, which uses a participant's voice to create a biometric voice print during the enrollment process. And when the participant has a check-in call, their voice is compared to the voice.
That's pretty funny. Cheers to that. That was funny. Seeing as that I've only slept with one person in 5.5, 6 years. She's right there, so I knew you were kidding. But good joke. Here, cheers on you. I'm doing good, man. Doing good. Doing good, man. Doing good. Yeah, just getting stoned and watching some news. That's what I do after work, right? Stony bartender here. I'm doing well tonight. Getting stoned, watching some Jen. It makes me laugh. And then, yeah. I'm guessing the dank is for some green, I'm hoping. I hope you got your nugs of choice out and ready for the night. Depending on, I guess, where you are, but it's definitely night here.
Smart Link, which is another option, enables participant monitoring via smartphone or
Cheers.
tablet using facial matching technology to establish identity. And global positioning system monitoring is of a participant's location and movement history using satellite technology through an ankle bracelet. This is all part of our effort as individuals come into the United States and individuals who are entering, who will proceed to immigration proceedings, to monitor and track where they are.
With the telephonic, though, any concern by folks around here that these migrants will take the phones and just toss them? And then
Do you have a record of people throwing phones away?
I'm just asking if that's a concern.
Our concern is ensuring that individuals who irregularly migrate to the United States proceed through our
I was like, did I say dank wrong? uh, I'm pretty sure I know how to say dank. That's some dank nugs. I've been smoking some dank all day. Yum yum.
process of, of course, being monitored, but also participating in hearings to determine whether or not they will be able to stay. I would note that nearly 80% of non-citizens released at the border from DHS custody under prosecutorial discretion have either received a notice to appear or are still within their window to report. So actually, the vast majority of people are appearing. In part, we have these monitoring systems in order to do that effectively.
Okay, on another topic, was it common for President Biden to do favors for Hunter Biden's international business partners, like writing college recommendations for their kids?
I've seen the report. I have no confirmation or comment on a report about whether or not the president, when he was a private citizen, wrote a college recommendation letter for an individual.
A college recommendation letter, though, from, at the time, a former vice president would be a big deal. So do we know what the president might have gotten in return for doing a favor like that?
Again, I have no confirmation.
Oh, I love Fox News. They're the only ones that ask the dickhead questions, which makes his face so very punchable. So very punchable. Such a punchable face. Oh. But at least he gets riled up.
Recommendation letter the president wrote when he was a private citizen, by the way, not serving in public office. That's even the report.
But he's the president now, and you're his spokesperson.
Correct. And he was not the president at the
He's the president, and you're the spokesperson. Yep, that's the situation. Thank you. Oh.
time of this report.
So there's evidence that the president at one point was office mates with Hunter and his brother Jim here in D.C.
It's not accurate.
That is not accurate. So when Hunter Biden is emailing a landlord, please have keys made available for new office mates, Joe Biden, Jill Biden, Jim Biden. That you're disputing.
They were not office mates, no.
They were not office mates. Okay.
Great. Go ahead.
Jen, on student loans,
Great.
you were sort of asked about this yesterday, but I just wanted to come back to it. So as people plan for the future, should borrowers expect that after August 31st they'll have to repay their loans, or is there a chance that it could be further extended after August 31st?
We'll continue to assess, and what we look at, well, of course, the economy is in a better state than it was a year ago, and we have a strong recovery. We also understand that there are a range of impacts that are still longer lasting because of the pandemic, including the impacts on costs and inflation, and this is part of the president's effort to help alleviate that, as was the family glitch announcement of yesterday. So we'll make an evaluation. The Department of Education will look at that on a range of factors as we get closer to that timeline.
Has the president at this point ruled out the possible executive level cancellation on a wide scale of student debt?
He has not ruled out, but I don't have any update on that. And I would note that, again, he would encourage Congress to send him a bill canceling $10,000 in student debt, something that he talked about looking forward to signing on the campaign trail.
I am quite odd, so I always like that. I've been told quite often I'm quite odd.
Just really briefly on the G20.
Yeah.
Secretary Yellen said today that that the U.S. might not attend meetings if Russians are there. Is she implying that these would just be individual meetings, or would it be a kind of broader scale boycott of the G20 in Bali?
I think they have later clarified she was referencing at the ministerial level and more specific meetings. I would point you to them of the more specifics.
Everybody in my circle, at least. We definitely say that, like, people are like, oh, you're so straight at that, like, you're so normal. How the hell did you end up that way? And why the hell are you here?
The president has also said, he said on the trip, that he did not think Russia should be a part of the G20, meeting. And I would note it's 7 months away, which is a lifetime in our lives, but it wasn't an indication of plans for us to boycott or not attend. It was just, it shouldn't be business as usual, which is something the president has also said.
Jen, is it a priority of the president to try to identify the Russian units that carried out the atrocities in Bucha? Is that something that the U.S. may be able to do, and is it something the president wants to have happen?
We will continue to assist in every way possible with these efforts to track down data, additional information, and contribute to the international effort to do exactly that.
Let me ask, if I can, a couple other questions that made news today. A judge has just issued the first outright acquittal of a defendant charged in the January 6th Capitol riot. This was a New Mexico man, Matthew Martin. He was acquitted on some misdemeanor charges by the judge. This man had claimed that he thought police allowed him into an entrance near the Capitol Rotunda. Does the White House have any view now that that case has been adjudicated?
I don't have any specific comment on that case. We continue to support the efforts of the January 6th Commission and all of the members in trying to get to the bottom of what happened that day to prevent it from happening in the future.
Well, let me go back to one last question as it relates to what's happening in Russia. The U.S. still doesn't have an ambassador to India. It appears increasingly clear that Los Angeles Mayor Garcetti doesn't have the votes right now to be confirmed. How does the lack of an ambassador to India impact our ability, America's ability, to pressure India not to work with Russia in providing any aid or assistance?
Well, our preference is always
That's a stupid question, right?
to have a confirmed ambassador on the ground. It's an incredibly important diplomatic position. We also engage with countries through a range of channels, and obviously our Deputy National Security Advisor was just in India recently in the last few weeks, conveying clearly what the consequences of violating sanctions would be and what the mechanisms are, and also making clear that that we do not think India should accelerate or increase imports of Russian energy and other commodities, even as obviously those decisions are made by individual countries, and also making clear that we stand ready to support India as in any efforts to diversify its imports and serve as a reliable supplier, even as they're only importing about 1 to 2% of their oil from India. So we have a range of ways to communicate and engage, and obviously sending our Deputy National Security Advisor is an example of that, but clearly our preference would be to have a confirmed ambassador in place.
President still support.
Yeah, obviously you'd rather have an ambassador, but that's the question is does it weaken our does it weaken us not to have an ambassador? It's such a basic fucking question. These are supposed to be the elite journalists, right? These are supposed to be our best, asking and pushing the White House. These are basic fucking questions.
Foundation.
He does. Good.
The Russian ruble has been on the rise. Viktor Orban in Hungary said today that he'd be happy to pay for Russian gas in rubles.
Honestly, the interpreter is some of my favorite. Like watching her face expressions while Jen is like getting really upset and angry is just, it's such a fantastic moment. Like her getting angry and the interpreter, there's some really good pause moments. Let's just say it's some of my best comedy. Just that, I mean, I'm cracking myself up watching it. Easily amused.
Is there anything the U.S. can do about this? Are you engaging Hungary on this point?
Well, I would first say in terms of the ruble, the reason it's important to note that the Russian central bank is making extreme policy decisions to artificially prop up the ruble. So it's not actually on the rise. It is being artificially propped up by limitations that they are putting in place, including barring banks from selling dollars to customers. Russian brokerages are not allowing foreign clients to sell securities. Exporters are being forced to sell 80% of their dollar revenues and buy.
Like, I think she goes off here again in a few minutes. And, like, yeah, in here, oh, man. Maybe we should just skip up there. But when she gets a little angry, this stuff right here, this is a pretty good one. This is a pretty good pause. You get these pauses, and it's like, oh, my goodness, it's so funny. Like, her expression and her expression, there's some very good pausable moments. Oh, you can't see it because of the chat. I'm gonna wait for a little bit so the chat goes away and you can see her face, because yeah, it's fantastic.
So they are essentially manipulating it on their end. As it relates to Hungary, I mean, slightly a different question, but obviously there was the recent election, as you noted, of Viktor Orban. I would note that Hungary is a NATO ally, continues to be. We continue to cooperate on a range of bilateral and shared global interests, including on NATO defense and on humanitarian assistance. They're currently hosting forces from an Army Stryker infantry troop as part of a NATO battle group. We regularly conduct joint training exercises with them, and we will continue to work to strengthen our partnership with Hungary. Obviously, reliance on the ruble is a decision individual countries will make, and we've obviously made our views clear on that front.
So you have engaged Hungary on this question?
That is not what I conveyed. I just conveyed they're a NATO ally. Go ahead.
We can go back to the sanctions. As they were announced this morning, the Sberbank and the Alpha Bank
Yeah.
sanctions, I believe, exclude energy. They're full blocking sanctions
Yes.
excluding energy. Similarly, the SOE sanctions coming tomorrow also will not affect the energy sector.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that balancing act? Is that because you're worried about domestic impact here in the U.S. on the price of natural gas, price of gasoline? Or is that because the Europeans asked you to sort of carve that out? Why is that still sort of a bridge too far for the U.S. on these sanctions? They're not really full blocking sanctions if they're excluding energy.
Well, I mean, I would say they're quite extensive, given Sberbank is the largest bank in Russia, and Alpha Bank is the largest private bank in Russia. So, and in total, we've now fully blocked more than 2/3 of Russia's banking sector. These conversations and discussions obviously are done in coordination with our European allies and partners, and we continue to assess how we can maximize the impact while minimizing the impact on other economies, including, of course, the global oil marketplace. And we've taken steps, of course, banning oil imports. A number of countries, including Poland in Europe, have announced their intention to take steps, but that's up to individual countries to make. But it's part coordination, assessment, with other countries and our allies about the impacts, but I would still say it's quite a significant step, given they're the largest bank in Russia.
So is it accurate then to say that this was done because of the Europeans saying, hey, this would be...
No, this is, but we do update them and brief them on the steps we take and why, and we look at the impacts on how things will impact the United States, how they will impact a range of our allies as we make decisions about sanctions.
Very quickly on the central bank actions propping up the ruble, do you have any sense of how long they're able to keep that up?
I don't have an assessment from here at this point in time on that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. On immigration, with the lifting of Section 42, there are a lot of Democrats, particularly Democratic senators, up for re-election who worry that you don't have a plan to either stop the spring surge of undocumented immigrants or handle it. What do you say to those Democrats?
Well, I would first say that Title 42 is not an immigration measure. It's a public health measure, and one that Congress has given the CDC authority to make a decision about. And we respect that and think that's absolutely right. This is why the president proposed an immigration bill on his first day in office, and we would certainly welcome efforts of anybody to work with us on that. But as we're implementing this over the course of the next 5 weeks, if I'm doing my math correctly, we've also surged resources from the Department of Homeland Security, and we will continue to take additional steps to implement and make clear that this is not the time to come, that there will still be significant measures put in place for anyone who tries to irregularly migrate to the United States.
Do you feel that what's your goal and what do you expect, what impact do you expect to have on the spring surge with those kinds of measures?
I would really point you to the Department of Homeland Security to make any projections of that, because we have not made any projections of what it will mean in terms of the ending of Title 42 either.
Thanks. I know that you talked about the stringent measures you've taken to keep the president safe from COVID that go beyond the CDC guidelines, but that's such a visual contrast between that and the president showing up maskless in front of people at some of these events. So how do you make sure that you keep that protection bubble around him? I'm sure you feel like you're asked to explain this ad nauseum, but the bubble's looking pretty porous lately. So how do you keep that sort of enforced?
I would say first that we continue to take measures that go beyond what the CDC protocols are. That includes ensuring that everybody who's going to see the president in a meeting is tested in advance, or if you're traveling with the president, you're tested in advance.
Ending Citizens United. Getting rid of corporations on endless financial power.
Possible, we take steps to socially distance in circumstances, which certainly the Oval Office and other meeting spaces in the White House allow for. If an individual in the White House is a close contact, they are asked to, or required to, I guess you could say, wear a mask for 10 days after that exposure. And they are also tested regularly following. So I would say we take additional measures that go beyond what the CDC protocols and requirements are to ensure that we are doing everything we can to keep principals safe. The president, the vice president, and others, of course, in the building.
Tested before the Easter event tomorrow, everyone who was there?
It's not at public events, I'm talking about at meetings. But again, I can check on the protocol.
And that's a hard one because executive orders can, during this pandemic, could give everybody Medicare for all, and an executive order could also decriminalize marijuana. So there's some things I would like to do on day one if I had that opportunity, but first and foremost is ending Citizens United. That is the most important thing to get us back on track, is we need to get money out of politics.
Calls for public events, sure.
Have you changed any protocols surrounding him in recent days as more people are in the administration contract this virus?
We've continued to implement stringent and strict protocols. I would note that even as we're looking at, with BA2, a very transmissible variant, as we all know and our public health officials have told us, we've seen an increase in cases, right? In the country, in the region, among the press corps, and certainly in the White House. But it is not at this point what we saw during Omicron.
That's done.
And what the steps we have taken here, including a policy put in place to ensure that return to work was part of our policies in the federal government, are meant to ensure that can continue to be the case. And even while we have individuals who are out with COVID, everyone here is required to be tested, highly recommended to be boosted. People who are out because of that, the vast majority have mild cases and are continuing to work from home.
Mild cases, so people are getting the flu. Okay.
And obviously, we are continuing to implement the return to work policy and feel we have the measures necessary to do that.
So what's the clearest version of the message that you're trying to send to Americans about living with this virus, even as infection rates rise? I mean, that it's not the end of the world if you get it, if you're boosted? I mean, is that the message you send through the president who's maskless in front of hundreds of people, that this isn't the end, that we have to live this way? Is that
The message we're sending is to follow the CDC protocols and guidance for where you live. The president does that. He did an event in Washington, D.C. today where it does not require mask wearing. There are other parts of the country, as you know, where he's traveled and he has.
It's funny to see how, like, some of them are like, why do we have to wear a mask? And others are like, he was out there without a mask on. It's very interesting to see the two sides in the same room asking opposite questions.
Where that has been the recommendation. Our protocols also here, we would certainly project this to the American people, are that getting vaccinated and getting boosted, and if you are immunocompromised or you're over a certain age, getting your next booster is certainly a way to help protect yourself. That's something the president has done, and every member of the senior staff and White House staff has done and will continue to do, although some of us are teasing the people who are over 50 that we're not old enough yet, but that's a sidebar. When we are, we will be doing that as well. So it is to follow the protocols and to recognize that the statistics show you are significantly more likely to be hospitalized and even to die if you are not vaccinated, if you are not boosted. And yes, we are living with COVID-19. We are continuing to fight it. And our biggest message right now is that we need to...
Is that we're living with it, right? That we're just going to be living with it forever and ever. It's never going away. Why are we still talking about it? Why are we still getting shots?
Resources from Congress to continue to have the to ensure we have programs for the uninsured, that we can provide treatments for immunocompromised, that we can make sure that we have testing mechanisms and booster mechanisms, and we're at serious risk of those programs not being able to continue. Some haven't, obviously. Go ahead, Karen.
Karen. On something you said to Mara, the Title 42 question, you said that the administration will be taking additional steps to make clear this is not the time to come. That was, of course, a pretty explicit message from the president and others last year, do not come. Is that still the message on May 24th?
Yes.
And then a follow-up to that, as the U.S. moves to end Title 42 in May, are there discussions now, or is there any update you can give us on ending the testing?
Yes. Yeah, we're going to miss her bluntness.
requirement for re-entry into the U.S. for people traveling here.
I don't have any update on that at this point in time. That's something we will continue to evaluate.
Thank you so much. I have a follow-up on sanctions and energy.
Sure.
The European Union said yesterday that they are paying Russia every day little more than $1 billion for gas and oil. How long can this go on, in the president's view, without undermining the collective effort to punish Russia?
Well, I would say that we continue to believe that it's up to individual countries to make assessments about what additional measures they will be put in place. While we are focused on continuing unity with our NATO allies and partners and our European partners, it does not mean that it is always identical, and different countries have to make their own assessments. What we've also tried to do is take steps to ensure there are other options to reduce dependence, even if it's a small percentage, and if there's a varying, as you well know, degree of reliance for these countries you're referencing on Russian oil. And some of them have taken steps to convey they want to reduce or end their dependence or import of Russian oil. And that's something certainly we'd support and play any constructive role in helping expedite.
This is a pretty good face freeze. Sit on that one for a second. Well, I was thinking about leaving, so let's go ahead and leave. All right. On to segment 2 of the day. Now that we're a little stony. That was enough Jen for a minute. All right, segment 2. This came up in my freaking newsfeed for some reason. I don't know if it's local news, so I wanted to check it out. And then from here, I wanted to go over the last couple days, new protests. Just get rid of that. So yeah, what's this all about?
Details just into the newsroom. Granville police now say there was a robbery at a gun range before 3 people were shot and left for dead inside. 11 Alive's Karis Belger is live at the scene. Karis, I see the police lights behind you. It looks like still an active scene. This investigation and this crime, really just such a blatant crime.
Yeah, good morning, and it's been going on for hours. As you can see behind me, the light's still here. The GBI have been investigating, and I've seen people walking away with some evidence bags since I've been here for a little over an hour. I'll step up so you can get a better look at what we're seeing here. So you have the authorities. They have still blocked off this road where you turn into the lock, stock, and barrel shooting range, and that is where the 3 individuals were found. We've been getting some updates from Granville police. If you take a look at the video that we shot earlier, this investigation has been going on since late last night. So here's what we know so far. The owners, Tommy and Evelyn Hawk, were here. So was their grandson, Luke. We understand Luke was home from college during spring break, helping his grandparents out at the shop. That was Luke's father, Richard, who wondered why his parents and his son had not come home, and he went looking for them at the shop last night, and he is the one, we understand, who found their bodies. And since then, there have been multiple agencies on scene, but as I mentioned, the GBI here now handling most of the work. No word yet on how long those bodies were here before they were found. That is something the authorities are looking into. And so as far as details are, there are still very few who have been reaching out to authorities trying to get some more information. We understand that normally Tommy and Evelyn would close up the shop around 5:30. And so they are asking people, the police are, anyone who is driving by between 5:30 and 6:30 who may have seen anything other than the white Ford dually truck and a black Ford Expedition parked here to call them, because that could give them some hints as to what may have happened and who they're looking for. And as you mentioned, this was a robbery. There were 40 guns that were taken. So the person is not in custody. So they are really trying to piece together what happened so they can get their hands on whoever may be responsible. Anyone with any info is asked to call the police.
Such a heartbreaking story, Karis. Thank you for that update. And we'll continue following this breaking news around the clock as new details become available. For now, you can get the latest on this story in our 11
Atlanta area. I do not know why that popped up in my YouTube thing, but that's the kind of local news we have. Fucking craziness. That just happened. So, if you're in Atlanta, I apologize for your local news. All right, a few protests. for the record, if this goes into commercial perfect. Sri Lanka is still going crazy, still going wild. Sri Lanka is the place of protest at the moment. And if you've not heard about it, that's because the mainstream media sucks. But yeah, Sri Lanka is going crazy with protests at the moment. They are the biggest news. But there are others. This one is Peruvian protests turn violent.
Roadblocks on fire as protesters throw rocks and sticks at police. Authorities shooting tear gas into crowds as they march towards the legislative palace in Lima. The growing tension as President Pedro Castillo imposed a curfew Tuesday to quell recent anti-government protests over rising gas and food prices.
Hago un llamado a la calma, a la serenidad. La protesta social es un derecho constitucional, pero debe hacerse dentro del marco de la ley.
Less than 24 hours later, amid escalating manifestations, that curfew dropped.
Lo único que podemos hacer ahorita es unirnos y salir todos adelante.
Cansados del mal manejo, cansados de que nos esté gobernando alguien que no sabe gobernar.
The government confirming at least 4 people have died, 3 of them over the weekend in the city of Huancayo, inland where protests began.
La policía ha manejado con mucho tino para evitar costo social. Sin embargo, se ha producido 3 muertes, pero no por la policía.
The outrage over the government's response to protests, another hit for the man who came in promising economic stability and was just elected last June. In less than a year in office, he's already faced 2 impeachments. President Castillo's curfew and handling of the deadly protests raising concerns about rights violations. The country's national coordinator for human rights saying the state of emergency violates Peruvians' rights and accusing the national police of using disproportionate force against protesters. It's a delicate topic that for many Peruvians...
It looks exactly like any Western culture's cops beating up on protesters. The only difference being is that their nation is under suspicion by the World Bank, and we are the World Bank. Like, it doesn't look any different than our protests. It doesn't look like they need the U.S. to step in. It just looks like the U.S. should stay the fuck away because they're doing exactly what we would be doing. And as always, the U.S. should stay the fuck away.
brings back memories of 1992. And amid social and economic unrest, since jailed former President Alberto Fujimori shut down Peru's Congress and judicial system and sent tanks into the streets.
What do you think it was about the curfew specifically that made the Peruvian people say, okay, that's it?
Oh, well, first of all, not even in the worst times of COVID, not even in the worst years of terrorism, which Peru has been through, decades ago, was there this 24-hour shutdown with no preparation. So this was clearly seen as a reaction by a president who didn't know what else to do.
Inflation has been an issue in Peru for years. One worsened recently with the war in Ukraine, hitting a 26-year high in March. Before the curfew, the government proposed dropping most fuel taxes in an attempt to lower prices, while also raising the minimum wage about 10%. Those protesting saying it's not enough.
There had been work stoppages and there had been roadblocks before the curfew, but the reaction has just emboldened those who were protesting. And, I really feel that it was
when you give that many protesters a crumb, it is a slap in the face. And they look like they had some solid protesting going. Like they had some pretty good numbers. You're going to get more than just a crumb with that kind of numbers. When they offer you crumbs, it's just freaking assaulting, and it's just going to enrage that big of a crowd. It's absolutely ridiculous. The oligarchs will pay.
Measure that not only is the president surely deeply regretting, but that it may actually be a turning point downward for this government.
All right, Issa joins us now live in studio. Issa, a lot to talk about here. So the president, who's been described as center-left, has had a really rough go. You mentioned the 2 impeachments, but you were just telling me this curfew actually made things so much worse. It's been lifted now. Are things any better?
They're not, Tom. That's the short answer. Cynthia from the university there in Lima told us that this is really just going to continue to go downhill in her opinion. She does not expect things to quiet down. They have not in the last 24 hours. She especially does not expect things to quiet down for the president. She says that there have been calls for him to resign already, not only from members of the opposition, but from members of the government who used to support him, who voted for him to not get impeached the last 2 times, who are now saying that they're fed up and they're going against him as well. Cynthia said that she suspects this could possibly even end in a 3rd impeachment. That would truly be historic, Tom. Again, that would be the 3rd impeachment in less than a year. He just came into office last summer. So too early to tell right now if that's how this will end up, but we'll be keeping a close eye to see if
and
it does.
impossible to pass any type of agenda. I do want to ask you, I want you to explain to our viewers, you've been trying to get in contact with the Peru government, the government there in Peru, the Peruvian government, and they told you something very interesting today.
Yeah, Tom, that's right. We did reach out to them. We asked them about all of this and also about the concerns over them violating human rights. In their response, what they said is that they were so sorry they could not speak to us today because they're actually on the road traveling with the president right now, going around trying to resolve the social unrest.
Sorry, we're busy trying to take care of it. Pretty good answer. And what I would have told the U.S. is we saw Standing Rock, go fuck yourself. You guys spray, in freezing cold temperatures, you spray protesters with water cannons. And that's what your president okayed, Mr. Progressive Biden there. So I would have told him to fuck right off. Speaking of America.
This is my secret to cutting my food bill in half.
Here's your secret for blah, 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 blah. This is groups protest against Disney's woke agenda. Disney is literally one of the biggest human trafficking havens on the planet. So many children and so many people disappeared from Orlando, Kissimmee, and Disney itself. But yet, we're going to protest about them turning kids gay. Fucking people are stupid, man. People are stupid. Protest them for the right shit. Protest Disney because they're a fucking sex trafficking haven. Not because they're turning kids gay. You stupid, stupid humans. Alright, let's check it out.
Outside Walt Disney Studios in Burbank tonight over what they are calling the company's quote-unquote...
So it's in Disney in Burbank, LA. So I would love to have got to run into these people in Orlando so I could tell them off. Because that's just stupid. Literally, you're protesting Disney for all the wrong reasons.
Agenda. This anger stemming from Disney recently coming out against Florida's parental rights in education bill, which critics have dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill. Travis Rice was at tonight's protest. He joins us live tonight in Burbank. Travis.
Alex, this is Disney Studios. This is where a lot of the top executives reside and where a lot of those big decisions are made. But tonight, a Christian group was here to basically say they feel Disney isn't so family-friendly anymore.
It's the opposite of the Mickey Mouse Club. Hundreds of people, parents, and even kids demonstrating in front of Walt Disney Studios in Burbank, saying the company is leaning...
And even kids. That kid looks so interested in the subject. That kid was absolutely the most interested person in this. Fucking stupid, man. He didn't want to be there. That's just... Kids don't care about this.
Too far left.
But to teach them at such a young age and to have a task force focusing on teaching these things to kids, I think it's just morally wrong as a Christian and just what I believe in my personal beliefs.
In what appeared to be part church service and part protest, the group called Hold the Line is also encouraging people to hit the entertainment titan in the pocketbook.
Right now it's a time to boycott and then it's a time to stand up.
This mom drove in from Orange County.
Our job is to be parents and then our job is to, make sure that they're watching appropriate things.
Just a few weeks ago, Disney employees...
It's your job. So don't protest. Yeah, go ahead and boycott. And I boycott tons of companies. I don't tell people about all of them. Because there's tons of horrible companies that you probably constantly use. Because you don't actually boycott people for the right reasons. Again, boycott Disney for the human trafficking.
He's walked out in Burbank claiming that the company had not done enough to stop the Florida education bill from becoming law. Meanwhile, Wednesday on Special Report, California's first transgender mayor, Lisa Middleton, weighed in on the saga.
It is time for us in this country to step back and realize that members of the LGBTQ plus community are Americans.
It's this idea that children are moldable, and what are we doing? Disney's taking a stance to say, we know children are moldable, and we're going to do what we can to mold them in the image that we desire.
Both sides couldn't be more animated about the issue, but those anti-Disney say they don't have a choice on speaking up.
What do you say to people that say Disney's not making parents put their programming on for kids?
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, what is the largest media corporation in the United States? Are people forced to use Google? Are people forced to use Apple? Are people forced to fly in airplanes? No, these are just the most convenient, powerful corporations.
We did reach out to Disney, but have not heard back yet for their statement on the protest. However, for the boycott, one Twitter user did write to us that this would mean there would be less lines at Disney.
Oh, this is perfect. I got a massive answer to this.
Disneyland. Alex?
And he was ready for it. That's a stupid protest.
Bread beast.
Alright. I need water. I had face surgery. I need constant water. But we got many more protests to get through, so I need water. My teeth are hurting.
By a police officer during a traffic stop in Miami last month are holding a vigil for him today. Local 10's Janine Stanwood is live with their message for the police chief. Janine.
Louis, at the time of the shooting, the police chief said someone was armed, there was a struggle, but now 1 month later, right now friends and family continue to gather. They have been insisting that this shooting was unjustified.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
It's been 1 month since Antoine Cooper was killed by Miami police. His family, represented by an attorney, gathering at the Northwest Miami-Dade location off Northwest 71st Street, where the 34-year-old lost his life.
Mr. Cooper had the right to be free from that lethal force, that unjust lethal force.
Body camera video shows part of the struggle before the gunfire. It all unfolded after a traffic stop March 8th. The officer asks if Cooper has weapons in the car. He says he does not. Then he's asked to step out. Miami police providing a photo of a weapon on scene. Cooper's family says that was not his.
At no time have we seen any weapon in Mr. Cooper's hand.
What I want is for this sergeant to be fired. I want him to be put in jail. I want him convicted.
The way things happened was injustice, and we want justice for our son. You know, there's no words that can describe the pain that we're feeling.
You can see friends and family continue to gather. We did reach out to Miami police. As you know, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is investigating. That is standard. The Miami Police Department tells us that the case involving Mr. Cooper is active and ongoing.
Yeah, fucking cops. That protest needs to get bigger because that's not going to go in the right way. There was a confrontation, but he didn't deserve to be shot. That's why you have tasers. Fucking, not everybody that bumps into the cops deserves to die. Fucking cops. Alright, there's more.
Activist Julius Kamau, who was on Thursday captured by cameras, first picketing outside Treasury building before he was arrested in a dramatic turn of events, was on Friday released on a 5,000 Kenya shillings police bond ahead of being charged Monday. The solo activist, who faces charges on creating disturbance, says he was protesting the high cost of living and calling for the resignation of Finance Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani. In a conversation with Citizen TV's Hassan Mugambi, the activist says he is out to fight for Kenyans.
The well-polished ritual that characterizes the Budget Day traditions at Treasury Building was Thursday marred with the dramatic arrest of activist Julius Kamau. He barely displayed the message on his placard when his feet were lifted from under him as he frantically tried to clutch onto anything and everything around him. He was arrested by 4 plain-clothed police officers who bungled him into a waiting police van. Friday afternoon, he was a free man. We caught up with him in Nairobi's Central Business District, where he narrated his ordeal.
Sikuongea dakika mingi, dakika 1-2 minutes nilikuwa nishanyanyuliwa juu, so nikachukuliwa, eventually nikaezwa juu makarau walikuwa wengi. Nikawekwa kwa ndai yao, kwa gari yao, nikawekwa chini, although walinikanyanga hata sasa nasikia huku kunauma kidogo, though I've forgiven them anyway.
It pained him that the very Kenyans he was picketing for just watched while others recorded using their phones. He says nothing will stop him.
Kunipiga walinipiga, but of course when I came there I was ready for that. In fact, I've been ready for that because the situation of this country is getting worse every day. High food prices, high cost of living, corruption, and these are things nobody is addressing.
Hey, sounds familiar. Sounds, I don't exactly familiar, or precisely familiar, or what country is he talking about? Every country? All the countries? He's talking about everywhere.
Mao is not new to controversy. He has faced countless arrests outside parliament buildings where he pickets almost on a daily basis. He also chained himself next to the Dedan Kimathi statue. All this, he says, he does on his own.
We don't need donors to do that. We don't need to be funded to do that. So always when I go, and most of the times I'm found in the streets of Nairobi doing that, giving that message. So I don't think there's anybody anakuanga amenituma.
He's expected to be arraigned Monday. Hassan Mugambi, Citizen TV.
Good on him. That is awesome. Kenya and Nairobi. We have a true activist there, working to fight the man.
Village this afternoon, a lot of different groups protesting the city's teardown of homeless encampments. On Wednesday, there was a standoff and several arrests after crews forcibly removed one of the encampments in the East Village. Tonight, CBS 2's Alice Gaynor tells us the mayor and other officials continue to defend their process.
As you know, our neighbors at 9th and B were violently swept on Wednesday. Shame!
People rallying at Tompkins Square Park say homeless encampments are not being handled properly.
An immediate end to the violent sweeps.
City officials again defended the process.
The rhetoric is there's sweeps and we're just taking people off. What's missing in that message is that we're out there every day engaging individuals and really building that trust.
Speaking during the 178th City Law Breakfast Friday morning, Department of Social Services Commissioner Gary Jenkins was grilled about the procedure.
It's not as though we go in the same day. We go out there with the outreach team and we provide notice that we are going to come and clean this area. We do provide storage for those individuals, so we don't discard all of their belongings.
Jenkins says there are 3,000 specialized beds available along with mental and physical health services. Groups here today say they want real housing, like apartments for the homeless, alleging shelters and the safe havens to be dangerous.
I think the solution is permanent housing for people.
Housing solves homelessness.
The violence that happens in there, I've never been in the shelter system, and I'm lucky, but I'm uplifting the voices of the houseless folks who are saying it's terrible.
Commissioner Jenkins says they're working to improve safety protocols. The mayor, who says he does unannounced checks of facilities overnight, repeats his challenge to others.
And I'm asking all those who believe we can do a better job to join me in the streets like I am in 2, 3 in the morning, speaking to people who are homeless to tell them there's a better way to go.
Police say so far more than 300 encampments have been dismantled. In the East Village, Alice Gaynor, CBS 2 News.
Good evening. It is an act of aggression condemned as a barbaric attack on an independent Democrat.
Okay, that's not for today. That is not for today. This one is.
One nuclear weapon could obliterate an entire city, potentially killing millions while threatening the environment and the lives of future generations through its long-term catastrophic effects. Here's who owns the most destructive weapons on the planet and the safeguards in place to make sure they don't use them. 9 countries make up what is referred to as the Nuclear Club. The US, the UK, Russia, France, Israel, Pakistan, India, China, and North Korea. But it's Russia and the US that possess 90% of the world's nukes. There are over 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world today, but in most cases, the exact number in each country's possession is a closely held national secret. A nuclear weapon, which can be delivered via air, land, or sea, is a device that uses nuclear reaction to create an explosion, giving off 4 types of energy: a blast wave, intense light, heat, and radiation. The explosion creates a large fireball, which vaporizes upward into a mushroom-shaped cloud. The material in the cloud drops back down to Earth as fallout, which is radioactive and can contaminate anything it lands on. Some nuclear weapons, like the intercontinental ballistic missile, can travel as far as 3,400 miles. That's the distance from New York to Alaska. The US invented the nuclear weapon, and in 1945 conducted the first nuclear test explosion, called the Trinity Test. That same year, the US detonated 2 more nuclear weapons, atomic bombs, on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 200,000 people. World War II ended soon after this, but then the Cold War started. The nuclear arms race began as the Soviet Union, the UK, France, and China began conducting their own nuclear test explosions. Countries started stockpiling nuclear arms amid the Cold War, and at the height of the nuclear age, there were 70,000 nuclear warheads around the globe. But in the years that followed, the UN introduced a slew of treaties to prevent nuclear weapon ranks from expanding further, such as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, in 1968. Today, almost every country in the world is part of the NPT, except for South Sudan, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. After the Cold War, the number of warheads decreased drastically, thanks to arms control agreements and the dismantling of retired equipment. But nuclear powers like the US and Russia are in the process of updating their arsenals and have no intention of giving them up. Between 2019 and 2028, the US will have spent $494 billion on upgrading its arsenal, modernizing outdated equipment from submarines to ballistic missiles to nuclear warheads.
Hey, thanks.
We got a few more short clips I wanted to do, so kind of jam out some short clips, see if we can get a discussion going. It's pretty chill in here tonight, so.
Destructive this
Supreme Court has endangered our lives by Tom Hartman.
Belief that Neil Gorsuch, whose mother tried to, who was the head of the EPA for 3 years and had to resign in disgrace during the Reagan administration, what he's saying, what the court is saying, or what he is saying anyway, and we'll see if the court says this, but I guarantee you there's going to be a case bringing this up. In fact, there already are several that are teed up for it, is that unless the law, he calls himself a textualist, and he says, you have to follow the text of the law, the black letter text of the law, which, sounds as weird and as, I'm an originalist. We should just follow what the founders intended. Yes, bring back slavery and stop women from voting. I mean, the originalists tried that, for a long time and got away with that scam for half of my lifetime anyway. And now it's the textualists. And so what Gorsuch is saying is, well, yeah, the Food and Drug Administration protected us from E. coli on romaine. Remember the big old romaine lettuce outbreak? How did we get notified of that? It was the Food and Drug Administration. Or excuse me, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. How about the Occupational Safety and Health Administration establishing workplace exposure levels to what killed my dad, asbestos? Well, Neil Gorsuch says that unless the law specifically says the EPA shall regulate this chemical, it doesn't have the authority to regulate that chemical. Unless the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, unless the legislation creating that agency specifically says you must regulate asbestos in the workplace to a certain level, if it doesn't say that, they can't do that. And here's the problem. Coming up with defining which chemicals need to be regulated, how heavily they need to be regulated, what the consequences for violating those regulations should be, along the sliding scale of it's a really big deal or it's not that big a deal, but it's still something we should be doing something about. All of those are decisions that require enormous amounts of scientific expertise, which legislators don't have. So Congress isn't going to sit around and say, okay, well, here's what we should do. And you know, they can interview 1,000 experts, you know, all day long if they had the time. But then, as Ian Millhiser pointed out, every time a new pathogen or problem or chemical comes on the market, Congress is supposed to pass a new law. This is what Neil Gorsuch wants, a completely deregulated America. And this, by the way, is what the Republican Party wants and has been arguing for a long time. Deregulation. You know, it's been the mantra of the GOP for years. Lower taxes, less regulation, smaller government. What does that mean? It means more people will die from E. coli. It means more people are going to get asbestos in their lungs and end up with mesothelioma like my dad did. It means that more people are going to, you know, die in car crashes. I mean, you just pick the aspect of more people are going to get ripped off by big banks and financial services companies. I mean, you know, on and on it goes. And this term, the court is going to hear a case regarding whether or not the EPA can enforce the Clean Water Act. I'm very concerned about this. This is not the American way.
Gotta enjoy time.
Here we have 2 weeks before the election. This laptop shows up. It's immediately dismissed by everybody. Oh, Russian disinformation. Nobody looked into it. Even 51 former intelligence officers, it's Russian disinformation. Turns out to be true. The media lied the whole time. And I just outlined 12 separate instances where we catch Joe Biden lying, saying repeatedly during the campaign, I've never talked to my son, not one time, about his foreign business dealings. Yet we have pictures with Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and some of his foreign business partners. So I can only imagine what the media reaction would be if it's Trump. What do you think this means for the Bidens, especially now that a grand jury is being asked about who the big guy is that we know to be Joe Biden?
Well, Sean, you know, the Biden family corruption issue is a very, very serious problem. I think as you point to all of these examples, it points to actually an even deeper, more serious problem that poses an existential threat to our democracy. And that problem lies in the fact that you have the mainstream media, you have social media, you have Google, which is much bigger and more powerful than social media, and you have the security state, as you saw with these 51 senior-level intelligence officials, all working as the arm and mouthpiece for the Washington elite, the power elite. This is not a real functioning democracy. We see dictatorships that also have elections, but they have almost total control over their media, and it makes it virtually impossible for any opposition candidate to challenge and win. And so when we look at what we're facing here, it's not so different. They decide, okay, Biden's the guy that we want to win. Here's the information that we want voters to see. We're going to shove away and hide any information we don't want them to see. And then we as voters have to make our decision about who we're going to vote for or not vote for based on what is essentially propaganda coming from those in power, this Washington elite, this power elite. And that is what poses this existential threat to our democracy that we all need to be very clear-eyed that we're dealing with here.
So we have zero experience, Hunter, getting all this money, all these deals with China, a $100,000 shopping spree, $1.5 billion deal, Bank of China, $30 million deal, as chronicled by Peter Schweitzer. We know that they got $3.5 million from a Russian oligarch, the former First Lady of Moscow. We know they got enough money designated for a sports car from a Kazakhstan oligarch. And then we have Burisma paying Hunter, no experience in oil, gas, energy, or Ukraine. He's getting paid millions, his company. And then Joe leverages $1 billion of our money, says, you're not getting it. You got 6 hours. Fire that prosecutor that's investigating my son, or I'm headed home. And son of a bee, they fired the guy. Now, that looks like a real quid pro quo with Joe to me. And it looks like the Biden family combined with all that money from all these countries, I have a pretty good inclination that they know all about Hunter Biden, his crack addiction, his proclivity towards, let's say, women of the night. I'll clean it up as best I can. And I believe that the president is likely compromised. Am I wrong?
This is a serious issue, Sean. It has to be investigated. This kind of corruption shouldn't exist within our government. Unfortunately, it does, and it has for a long time. As we approach the 2022 elections later this year, as we approach the 2024 election, what I really want to redirect people's focus and attention on is this fact that you have the Washington elite that is essentially controlling what we see and hear. The reason why this is important for us to know is because we as voters have to be able to sift through that propaganda in order to try to find and recognize the real truth and information and make that best informed decision so that we can get rid of these politicians who are part of this establishment and continuing to propagate this nonsense and this insanity that is posing this real threat to the existence of our actual democratic republic.
This Tuesday, graduate students at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology voted overwhelmingly to form a union for graduate student workers at the university. The MIT Graduate Students Union, which chose to affiliate with UE, the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, represents over 3,800 members, making it one of the largest labor union victories in recent years. MIT, a world-renowned scientific institution, derives much of its reputation from the research that graduate students do. Despite their immense contribution, many
Sabby Sabs used to work there and literally has hours of her talking about this. So if you need something deep or in-depth, this is from Breakthrough News, but Sabby Sabs or Sabrina Salvani, she has a ton of information on this subject. She had the whole discussion with Ron Pacone, if you want to check it out.
Radio and Machine Workers of America represents over 3,800 members, making it one of the largest labor union victories in recent years. MIT, a world-renowned scientific institution, derives much of its reputation from the research that graduate students do. Despite their immense contribution, many graduate students find themselves barely scraping by.
So I am a research assistant. Basically, I do things like, run experiments, I write code. I basically produce the research that makes MIT, the scientific innovator that, it's known to be. Many times, I'm in the lab from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. basically. We were paid very little for the amount of work that we put in. 70% of that goes back to MIT. I pay around 65% of my stipend on rent. This is something that's on my mind basically almost any time I make any purchase.
MIT isn't exactly strapped for cash. Everywhere you look, there's new construction, buildings donated by the Koch brothers, even a new MIT museum being built for the fall, making it all the more perplexing that MIT's grad student workers are making poverty wages.
I think when we started organizing, MIT's endowment was around $17 or $18 billion. And actually, over the course of the pandemic, in the course of 1 year, it spiked up, it increased by 50%. So it went from 18 billion up to $27 billion just in 1 year. And if MIT made $9 billion in one single year, they could definitely afford to support the people who made that money possible.
Despite having the means to pay
Right?
grad students a living.
It's all about freaking the respect of, giving the workers part of the production. We're producing everything. Why shouldn't we get part of it?
Wage and provide affordable health care and housing, the university chose instead to launch an all-out anti-union campaign.
Something they did was they held meetings with the faculty and they basically spread anti-union talking points to the faculty and then encouraged the faculty to also express these opinions to their students. I remember also right before election day, that Sunday night, they sent a mass text to basically all MIT students saying, this is why you should vote no for the union.
These attacks only affirmed the students' belief that MIT feared the power that...
Man, that would just infuriate me. That would get me on the phone. I would have so many group texts after they did that to me. Fuck you. We're pushing for a union and you're going to go ahead and... Oh, fuck you.
Union could wield. Members of the new union wanted their victory to serve as inspiration to other graduate students and all workers across the country.
I think grad students are doing the important work to make their universities become successful. And we should realize that, and we should realize our power.
Hell yeah, you should. Good job, guys. I'm all for them. Good for them on pushing the oligarchs. MIT is funded by a lot of some of the richest people who benefit from that shit and benefit off the back of the working man. Good for that union. One more short clip before we go to the next big segment.
Just a few questions.
Want to check this out? Jimmy Dore versus Eric Adams, broken window theory.
I don't really chew
Revolutionary
my food.
Blackout Network did this.
40.
I have not checked it out yet. I saw it and I was like, oh, this is awesome. So Jimmy Dore versus Eric Adams with, I believe it looked like CJ and Nick. CJ and Nick.
Broken window theory policing thing. That's where you enforce the most minor of crimes. And like if a broken window is broken, you have to fix that window immediately or ticket the person with the broken window.
Yeah.
If a car has a flat tire, you ticket that tire, you tow it. You get that. You can't have any. So that's the idea, and that was what was.
Have you ever heard of this, Nick? Broken window policy?
Yeah, I wrote it up. I'm glad Jim's here, man. So straight up, because I wrote an op-ed that went in great detail, destroying all the propaganda. And one thing that abolitionists, we gotta continue to let people know what broken windows policing is. There's so many people that don't even know that this is the dominant ideology of policing. And once people learn what broken windows policing is, that Jimmy explains here, and every person I explained it to what broken windows policing is, they were like, "What?"
Yes.
Like it's one of the reactions.
People don't realize it. You don't
people
realize
immediately
it.
become disgusted, and that's why I'm glad that Jimmy led the video this way too, because that's one of the things I immediately talked about in the article. I'm like, how can you say that we have a fair policing system when they purposely aiming for a community and purposely trying to over-police them, and that's the stated goal? Like they are not even hiding about their strategy. But we can continue with the video because Jimmy.
And Nick, guess what? I'm not saying it wasn't called this, and it was something similar, but the slave overseers had the same sort of ideology. They would go out and mess with slaves who didn't have no problem, just to stir up shit. So I see it as a similar sort of tactic. But let's get back to this.
Was credited for a little while anyway with bringing crime down in New York City. Now we've come to know that doesn't actually work, and that there were crime that New York was going down like the rest of the country was going down. Their crime and the necessary, and then they were also doing stop and frisk in New York City, which is 100% illegal.
But you know, the guy that came up with the broken windows theory was like, that is not what I was getting at with that theory.
That's exactly right. You're right. Yeah. So
there is a thing to making it nicer, but they're not going to do that. They'll police you. They're not going to make it nicer.
Right. That's right. The guy who invented this thing said that the people in New York City, the cops distorted it and they implemented it incorrectly, of course. So here's this new story. So the new mayor, who is an African-American, I'm pretty sure, here he is going.
Yeah, he is a coon. He's specifically put there, Nick. I know you know. I think you believe this too. He's specifically put there to do all the things they wanted to do that they can't do with a white mayor. That's why I believe he was specifically put there for the police state. For the police state. Absolutely.
Going backwards. As Adams toughens on crime, some fear a return to the 90s era of policing. In Mayor Eric Adams' first 3 months in office, New York City has been marred by shootings and hate crimes, a fatal subway shoving in Times Square, and other high-profile killings. Now, the mayor is testing just how much a liberal city is willing to empower its police. If it's one thing, the New York police...
So that's when he goes off on a tangent. So I'll now fast forward back to where we were, so you understand what he's talking about when he gets to this part of the story here.
New measures will initially be utilized in neighborhoods experiencing high rates of gun violence in Brooklyn and the Bronx. So the new measure, they're going to go after the poor people. Mm-hmm. They immediately go after black and brown poor people. That's exactly what they did with stop and frisk.
If they were going after gun violence, like that dice game shit, this is what they do.
Go ahead, Nick. Go ahead.
This is a good segment because we have to explain what the cops do, and that is what that is. And I wrote op-ed. I'll let this video play a little bit more. I want to show you guys. I haven't plugged it in a while because I actually wrote an op-ed. No, you would never ever see someone write an op-ed defending police budgets, right? I wrote it's like maybe 2,000-3,000 word op-ed, completely shredding our police state and going over every single argument they made and debunking it. Why you guys think I can do this all day? I can do this all day. But anyway, look, we can play the video and I'm gonna show you guys what I wrote on broken windows policing and why Jimmy's on point here. Like Jimmy is you. I don't know, like Jimmy proposed solutions, right, to these issues. He's good at talking about it and proposing it, but he's using the right language because at 10 Demands, we want to highlight that this is an economic war. Broken windows is regressive economics that is designed to impose financial penalties on the working class. So let's continue the video, and I know you gotta go soon, but I'm gonna shortly plug this.
Yeah. It's like I said, if you want to continue, you can absolutely continue. I just checked my messages to see if I got the link from Misty yet, and I haven't gotten it yet, so I'm not late. But in another video, people may not know this, but Jimmy Dore talks about how he knows a lot of cops, like his dad is a cop. I think he said his dad is a cop, his brother's a cop, his cousin, his grandfather, like, so he grew up in this, and he says it even himself. He's like, there's no good cops. There's cops who assimilate to the system, and then there's the ones who get out of it. That's it. There's no that concept doesn't exist. He's like, that doesn't exist. So I'm loving what Jimmy has been saying lately about the topic. But let's continue. See how much I can get through before I got to take off.
They do with speech. This is the same thing. It's broken windows theory of speech. You need to aggressively punish the tiniest things, and it doesn't. It makes things shittier and like more angry. Yeah.
The new measure will be in poor black and brown neighborhoods in Brooklyn and Bronx, some of the same areas where black and Hispanic New Yorkers were disproportionately affected by stop and frisk police tactics that were deemed unconstitutional. After years of national Democratic efforts to distance themselves from 90s style tough on crime tactics, Mr. Adams is now pushing New York into a new era of more aggressive law enforcement, even with the city far safer than in earlier decades.
I'm not sure.
Your thoughts, Nick?
I don't know if Jimmy touched on this, but he covering this great. But he mentioned how Adams is pushing a new aggressive style of law enforcement. Eric Adams openly came out in support of stop and frisk. You know the thing that Jimmy is talking about right now? In 2021, literally supporting stop and frisk. And you guys think he's not about to implement that? They're literally looking to expand the police in NYPD, and they're slow rolling it. So we're definitely gonna see that back. If you don't mind, I want to share this part.
Go ahead.
I kind of want to get your reaction too, because I actually may do a live stream just breaking this article down, because I haven't done it since I wrote this last year. This is like my second op-ed I ever wrote. Let me say this.
Live streaming can be tricky,
time,
and sometimes
right?
trying to find the right software.
Trying to get something else set up, and
let me say this part right here, because this is why I'm talking about broken windows policing. So this is my article. I'm gonna highlight this so I don't lose my spot. But this is the article. I might do a little stream while I break this down, because I literally all my abolitionist thoughts I put in this one fucking article, and I debunk everything. I may do a whole stream while I just cover this in general. I literally talk about what the cops do. I talk about the history of policing. I talk about what our Black revolutionary leader says. I talk about how they enforce racial hierarchies. Like this is, I don't plug my op-eds enough. And another reason why I'm doing it, because I'm actually gonna start writing some more. I got like 4 article ideas. Like I need to start doing it though. It's a lot of work, because as you see, I take my time and I try to find a lot of sources in here. I talk about the history of policing, the new Jim Crow. I literally, like you see, I cover all this stuff with facts, but this is why I talk about broken windows policing for a bit. Right? And I talk about how Eric Garner and Ike Gurley, they were 2 victims of broken window policing. Eric Garner, he sued the cops before because he kept being harassed over low-level grievances, right? And this is a Marxist conversation that must be had, because what broken window policing is them de facto imposing regressive fines and fees on the working class. I told you guys, we need to frame everything in terms of the class war. The expansion of the police state is the class war. And I think I explained it here. So this is the paragraph I explained it. Liberals and conservatives claim the police protect and serve their communities, but we already established they do not prevent crime. What they actually do is consistently impose regressive taxes on the poor and working class people in form of fine fees and civil asset forfeiture. So who is more likely to get civil asset forfeiture? The people who are targeted by broken windows policing.
Yo.
So I explained, I said, this is a for-profit policing. Sorry, this for-profit policing is a capitalist scheme that operates to transfer wealth from minority communities back to the wealthy white ruling class. And that's why you continue to see giant disparities of black and white wealth.
Let me cut it off there. But always good to check out Revolutionary Blackout Network. And I had not seen that segment on Jimmy. I don't know if it's been dropped yet or what has happened. So I'll be looking forward to binging Jimmy one of these days soon. But I wanted to get on to Rania and Ben Norton, Rania Khalid and Ben Norton. We have Ukraine to Syria, how imperialism and sabotage divided the West, the Western life for 100 years with Ben Norton. And I wanted to check this out for a bit. This is a pretty good segment. We can't watch the whole thing, obviously, but it's always good to give Rania and Ben some time.
I just want to get right into it because I think this is such an important topic, especially.
And because I'm blazing another bowl, let's chill and blaze and catch this for a little bit.
Since we're in the time of yet another major war. So can you start out maybe by walking us through the most relevant tendencies on the Western left and where they stand with respect to the war in Ukraine? And then after that, we can get into like why these tendencies exist the way they do.
Well, first of all, I think that we need to be clear that these splits are not necessarily unique to the U.S. left. We could talk about similar splits in the European left and in general, kind of internationally. But I think we also needed to distinguish at the beginning of this conversation here these tendencies within the left in the imperial core and the global north and in the global south, because these splits do kind of exist in the global south in some ways, but they tend to be very minor because the left in the global south, in the periphery, tends to be pretty unified on questions of anti-imperialism, right? Because they're in the global south, they're in the periphery. These splits tend to be much more common in the imperial core, and I think that's a reflection of the fact that being a socialist in the imperial core brings extra responsibilities with extra sensitivity to the fact that it's not the same as being a socialist in the global south, that you have different responsibilities, that you have a different political role. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, on the global north, don't necessarily think about that perspective. They don't understand that they do have to play a different role as socialists because they have this historic responsibility and current responsibility to challenge imperialism, to challenge neocolonialism. And so the socialist struggle is not going to be the same everywhere. So in terms of the US, there's a very long and sometimes inglorious history of socialist movements, parties, organizations ignoring that responsibility, abandoning anti-imperialism, and really allying in some ways with imperialism, but trying to basically do it in a left-wing way and say that, well, we can be socialists, but also basically support imperialism. That misunderstands that if you want to be anti-capitalist, you have to be anti-imperialist, because the whole understanding of capitalism for the past 100 years is that capitalism is a global system. It is not just based in your country. And that global system is undergirded by imperialism. Imperialism is the way in which capitalism is organized internationally. There's not just a division of labor locally in your country. That is, you don't just have companies exploiting people in Amazon and McDonald's and Walmart in the United States. I mean, there's a lot of exploitation of workers in the US, and we should absolutely support the workers in Amazon who are unionizing and in other companies. But we also need to understand that there's an international division of labor. Where do the materials, the raw materials used to create those goods come from? They come pretty much from the global south. They create the shirts, the pants, even much of the food products that are sold in those companies in the global north. So even within the working class in the United States, there are all these divisions, and then there are the international divisions. So long story short, the point I wanted to stress there at the beginning is that there needs to be extra sensitivity to that understanding. And that needs to be a key part of the socialist struggle in the global north, is understanding how to also challenge imperialism, because otherwise what you end up doing is just trying to divide the treasure of the imperial plunder, right? And just all the imperial pillaging done of the global south, you can just divide that more equitably in the global north. That's not what we as socialists, as anti-imperialists, that's not what we want. We want to actually have workers' democracy, economic democracy for all workers around the world. And that isn't to say that the struggle of workers in the global north is not relevant. It's absolutely relevant. It's important. We need to have more unions, have better workers' protections. But it needs to always be done with the understanding that that struggle has to go hand in hand with the anti-imperialist struggle. So that long, beginning, that introduction there, I say that just to understand that contradiction is exactly what has led historically to so many divisions within the left and the global north. I would argue that the vast majority of the splits in the left have historically been because of that contradiction of imperialism. And that brings us to the war in Ukraine today. And we see the same split in very similar ways, where you see some elements on the left in the US and Europe and Canada basically defending NATO. And these tend to be the softer kind of social democratic movements who basically say that NATO is a defensive alliance, which ignores the entire history of NATO and how it destroyed Libya, it destroyed Yugoslavia, it supported fascists and former Nazis in Operation Gladio during the First Cold War. NATO is not a defensive alliance. It has always been a right-wing, offensive, anti-communist alliance. It was formed in 1949, including the fascist dictatorship of Portugal as one of the founding members. So there's those factions of the left. Then there's also a faction basically saying that this is an inter-imperialist rivalry, that Russia is supposedly an imperialist power and that the US is an imperialist power. And we should say, Pax on both their houses were against both neither Washington nor Moscow. And this is a position which we'll talk about that goes back to the First Cold War. And basically this kind of both sidesism ends up justifying imperialism and justifying the role of the US in provoking many of these wars. So that's another position I think that is pretty problematic. In fact, Rania, you're over at Breakthrough News, your colleague Brian Becker at the Socialist Program and I had a really good discussion about why Russia is not an imperialist power. The war in Ukraine is not an inter-imperialist war. In many ways, Russia, the existence of Russia as a nation state, the territorial integrity of Russia is pretty on weak footing. And we have seen that the US and NATO have been desperately trying to break up the Russian Federation as they did to Yugoslavia. And this isn't to justify the Russian invasion, which I think is extremely tragic and bad for the people of Ukraine, bad for the people of Russia for that matter. But the reality is that if you ignore that historical context of NATO and the US doing everything they can to surround Russia with military bases, violating their promises not to expand, putting weapons directly on Russia's borders, doing military exercises in Estonia right on Russia's borders, threatening to put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, a de facto NATOization of Ukraine through military interoperability of the Ukrainian military with NATO's military forces. If you ignore all of that history and then just say that Russia is bad, but also the US is bad, and that's not a proper socialist analysis. So, and then finally, the other major split you can see right now is those of us who I think is the correct position, is understanding that, yes, that doesn't mean that we endorse the war, but we also have to understand that it is the US and NATO that bear responsibility for starting this war. And I should say that this is the position of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. So, we constant hear of this talk of, well, what is the agency of leftists in the country, right? Well, there is a massive there's a massive party in Russia, which is socialist and anti-imperialist. It's called the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. By the way, it's the second largest party in all of Russia. It is the main opposition party in Russia. And their position has been saying, you can find this in English on their website, the US and NATO are responsible for starting this war. So those are the different splits and the different perspectives on this war. And we can talk about, what brought the left and the US to be so divided on these questions.
But I want to bring everything you just talked about to today, because, and when I mean today, I mean like the last 20 years, let's say, because the wars we've had over the last 20 years, especially for those who are, part of our younger audience, they oftentimes think that there was some sort of like anti-war movement, which there was, that was, united over the Iraq War. And I think that the thing is, though, the Iraq War was a bit of an exception, because it was probably the first time since maybe the Vietnam War, which you mentioned also had its splits, but at some point it did become like a big, everybody was against it kind of movement. But with the Iraq War, it was like, it seemed like everyone on the left was against it for the most part. And I mean the second Iraq War, not the first one. But then I think for those who are maybe like under the age of 40, it got really confusing, because you get to the Arab Spring to 2011, and then suddenly you saw this bizarre split over the issue of Libya and the no-fly zone, and over the issue of Syria, which was even bigger, I think, and lasted even longer and did so much damage to the left, including to like the Palestine Solidarity Movement, which you and I have discussed on other platforms before, so we don't need to get too much into that. But I'm wondering if you could just very briefly connect what you just discussed to some of the splits that we see today coming into the war in Ukraine as well, where you do see this split of like, these are the common talking points. You have to support Libyan agency. You have to support Syrian agency. You have to support Ukrainian agency. Just because the U.S. is an empire and is imperialist doesn't mean that Russia's not imperialist and can't do just as bad to Ukraine. Doesn't mean that Assad isn't evil and you must support overthrowing him. It doesn't mean that Gaddafi isn't evil, right? We have to support the leftists on the ground. And then we also have to support not just the leftists on the ground, the reactionary forces on the ground, because they're at the forefront of a revolution. So can you kind of talk about how all of what you just discussed from 100 years ago, from 50 years ago, is actually totally relevant to what we see happening today over these wars?
Absolutely. I mean, the reason I went into all that history, explaining it in detail, is because these are really the same kind of political divisions that we see today. That's why I said going back 100 years to 1916, with the split in the Second International over World War I, we see again and again and again this pattern of the left being split over these questions of imperialism. And today, I mean, it's still extremely relevant. You mentioned something very important, Rania, Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam was in many ways similar to how the Syria war kind of split the U.S. left. I mean, Vietnam was so similar. Today, we have this idea that the left was all against the war in Vietnam. No. Unfortunately, I don't say this with happiness. There were a lot of parts of the U.S. left that were very soft on or even supportive of the war in Vietnam, because they said that Ho Chi Minh was an evil Stalinist, and they said that it was evil authoritarian communism, Stalinism, and that the U.S. had to defeat the evil Stalinists and defend democracy. I mean, we see that these kind of same talking points recycled, just as we saw people basically saying that we have to ally with the CIA and Jabhat al-Nusra, Syrian al-Qaeda, because of evil Assadism and Assadists. No, I mean, this is an infantile analysis. Let's not forget that in the 1960s and 70s, there were splits in the U.S. left over the question of Vietnam. I mean, one of the most famous examples is the Beyond Vietnam speech by MLK, right? Martin Luther King Jr. was, I mean, he wasn't a mainstream figure. The mainstream acceptance of MLK came much later, but he wasn't as demonized until he gave this famous speech, Beyond Vietnam, in which he said that the U.S. is the world's leading purveyor of violence in the world. That's an exact quote. The U.S. is the leading purveyor of violence in the world. He came out against the war in Vietnam, and he said that the three evils were racism, consumerism, and militarism.
That's a pretty damn good quote. That's a very good quote. MLK had so many quotes that like mainstream media cannot gobble up. So many things that he said are just freaking, like his socialist quotes, his anti-war quotes are just top notch. But mainstream media will never push that narrative about him.
In militarism specifically, he started becoming more
What a
strident.
tanky.
Sorry?
What a tanky.
No, exactly. So, and actually, there were a lot of splits over that. And in fact, there's a figure who's not as well known. Ironically, Obama is trying to make a movie about this guy, a CIA agent who was part of the left, who was trying to divide the left back then, named Bayard Rustin. And Bayard Rustin famously criticized MLK for going out against the Vietnam War. Bayard Rustin also was famous. He was a civil rights activist. Who became a CIA agent. He was famous also, and a neoconservative, by the way. He was also famous for convincing MLK to abandon violence and opposing Malcolm X and encouraging nonviolence. Because at the beginning, I mean, MLK actually, he had guns in his house for self-defense because there had been so many assassination attempts against him. And Bayard Rustin later became a leader of Social Democrats USA. Social Democrats USA was an organization that split after the Socialist Party of America. It actually ended up splitting over because they decided they were just going to support the Democratic Party. And they didn't want to run independent presidential candidates. And they split between the Social Democrats USA, and Bayard Rustin was one of the leaders. And then they also split into the Socialist Party USA, which continued running presidential candidates and opposing the Democratic Party. And then there was another split led by this guy named Michael Harrington, who formed DSA. And those splits all represented different divisions over the question of Vietnam. Social Democrats USA basically were soft supporters of Vietnam because they said that the Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese National Liberation Front were Stalinists and that they had to be opposed. Whereas Michael Harrington opposed the resistance. The guy who founded DSA, he did not support the Vietnamese resistance, but he also called for withdrawing the U.S. military. And then there were the revolutionary socialists, the anti-imperialists, who supported the Vietnamese people's resistance against this genocidal war led by U.S. imperialism. And that led to splits even within SDS, this famous, organization of students, right? And then also there's another famous split in SNCC, right? The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They changed their name. to the Student National Coordinating Committee. They dropped their commitment to nonviolence, and they supported the Vietnamese resistance against imperialism. So the point is that all of these splits that we talk about over Syria, the same thing happened in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s over Vietnam. The idea that the entire U.S. left was against Vietnam is completely false. Many parts of the U.S. left had a very bad position on Vietnam. And so it's not that surprising to see that people like Carl Gershman, who is Carl Gershman, the founding longtime director of the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED. This is a CIA cutout created in 1983 by the Ronald Reagan administration and Bill Casey's CIA. Carl Gershman had his origins in that same student movement, right? Carl Gershman was a leader of Social Democrats USA, along with Bayard Rustin. So the reason I mention that is you talk about the neoconservatives. There were neoconservative forces that emerged later on because they took this position basically saying that the divisions in the left are not imperialism against anti-imperialism. It's not the Vietnamese people resisting this genocidal war waged by U.S. imperialism. Rather, it's authoritarianism in scare quotes or democracy. And this explains this idea about Syria and Libya. It's the same ideological split. Carl Gershman, someone who worked for the Ronald Reagan administration, who became a neoconservative basically, although he was always a Democrat. He was the leader until last year, from 1983 until 2021. He was the leader of the CIA cutout, the NED, that has carried out regime changes around the world, color revolutions. He was a leader of Social Democrats USA.
That's
who had
incredible.
origins in that movement, because basically we see this idea, which I think is so fallacious, that the divisions in the left are between democracy and authoritarianism. It is too simplified. It is infantile. It refuses to understand the role that imperialism plays in all these conflicts. And this gets us to understanding why the left continues to make these same mistakes over Syria and Libya. It doesn't matter what you think about Bashar al-Assad and the government of Syria. This is a war led by the imperialist powers to destroy a post-colonial nation. This is a neo-colonial war. And similarly with Russia, it doesn't matter what you think about the Russian government. NATO and the US, Biden said it very clearly. They want to overthrow the government of Russia, to create a new puppet regime, and eventually to break up the Russian Federation, as Brzezinski infamously called for in 1997 in an article in Foreign Affairs, in which he said that Russia should be broken up into a European Russia, a Mongolian Russia, and Siberian Russia, and an East Asian Russia. That is the game plan. That is the game plan.
You know who would love that too is like these neo-Nazis who literally see Russia, by the way, as like the Mongols.
All right, I'm going to skip ahead to his opinion watching the war. I don't want to listen to his COVID opinion. I don't want to listen to his, assassination in Central America, George Orwell. But I wanted to talk about his Ukraine and Global South from the Global South. Both of these people live in different places. She is in Lebanon. He is in Nicaragua. So they both have very different opinions of how mainstream media is funneling the information.
You're in the Global South. You're in Nicaragua. What has it been like experiencing this from there? And what do you think it says about the sort of global order that there's such a difference of opinion in the majority of the world than what we're seeing coming out of the US and Europe?
I think it says a lot. You at Breakthrough, Rania, and Eugene Purrier have been doing excellent coverage of this. I love seeing the interviews that you've done with people from South Africa and other different movements in the Global South, in Latin America and Africa and Asia. It's the statement in particular from South Africa, I think, is very important. I know you interviewed someone from the ruling party, the ANC, and the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, also made very similar comments. The president of South Africa, a major country, said that NATO and the U.S., specifically NATO, bear responsibility for causing the war in Ukraine, which is pretty obvious to anyone who knows the kind of basic history of this conflict going back to the U.S.-sponsored coup in Ukraine in 2014. But we've seen again and again in the Global South, leaders have made very similar comments, saying that while they might not openly endorse the war, for instance, the ANC in South Africa and Ramaphosa, the president, did not endorse the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and many movements in the Global South have not endorsed the invasion, but they have said, they've made it very clear that it's the U.S. and NATO that bear responsibility for starting this war, for provoking Russia at every single stage, for surrounding Russia, and making Russia basically forcing it to reply in some way. And that doesn't mean that we defend the invasion. But the reality is that if you ignore that part of the equation, you can't call yourself an anti-war activist or anti-imperialist or whatever, because the reality is that we see this simplistic narrative among some parts of the left that say that, particularly in North America and Western Europe, they say that, well, if you're an anti-war activist, you have to oppose the war in Ukraine. But this is not a war that just started on February 24th, right? This is a war that started in 2014 when the U.S. overthrew Ukraine's democratically elected president, Viktor.
And again, time is fluid, so you can go back way further if you like. I think a general easy way to look at it is 2014, but you can go back way further. You can go back to 1800 easily.
Yanukovych, and installed a right-wing regime that repressed the rights of Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the east. And by the way, there was a lot of violence in that coup, including in Odessa in May of 2014. There were over 50 people who were burnt to death after neo-Nazis and extremists, they set fire to a union hall, a labor union building, and there were leftists who were burnt to death. That's never mentioned, by the way. And then in 2015, the US-backed Ukrainian government, the right-wing government, they banned the Communist Party. They banned the use of all communist symbols, of any left-wing symbols. And of course, Zelensky just banned all the remaining socialist parties. So none of that's ever acknowledged. And yet alone the fact that from 2014 until when Russia invaded on February 24th, 14,000 Ukrainians died in 8 years of the civil war fueled by NATO and the US and Europe. And those 14,000 Ukrainians are never mentioned. Those were Ukrainians who died before Russia sent a single troop in. And many countries in the global south, they recognize this because they have been victims of these proxy wars, of these coups and operations organized by the US. And they have seen very clearly that Russia has also taken a foreign policy that has been supportive of them. And this, I think, is another reason why Russia is pretty popular in the global south. What's interesting is that Russia's popular not only with left-wing governments in the global south, even some right-wing governments in the global south, like in India, which is one of the most horrific right-wing regimes right now in the world. But India has its own national interests, regardless of who the president, the prime minister of India is. Right now, it's Narendra Modi. But if the Indian National Congress, the kind of center-left party, if they were in power, they would be taking a very similar position because India has national interests and Russia is one of its important partners in terms of oil, gas, wheat, fertilizers, and trade. So a lot of countries in the global south, they recognize that Russia is in this situation that they can identify with. Now, I should be clear that many of these governments, again, did not openly endorse the invasion. So for instance, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Bolivia have all taken a position of criticizing the US and NATO. Evo Morales, the former president of Bolivia, has actually created a campaign to abolish NATO and training people, educating people about the history of NATO's crimes. But at the same time, these countries, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, they have not openly endorsed the invasion, but they have said that the US and NATO bear responsibility for starting the war. So I think and China has the same position. China has said that the US and NATO bear responsibility for starting the war in Ukraine, but has not openly endorsed the war. And that makes sense because these countries also very much value the principles of non-intervention and territorial integrity. And they understand that they can't support an invasion like this because then it would establish a precedent if the US uses Colombia to invade Venezuela or the US tries to invade China. They can't establish a precedent, but they also understand the historical context for what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that when we talk about what should be the anti-imperialist perspective, I gotta say, Cuba's a place to look oftentimes. I mean, I think Cuba's one of the most solidly, and of course, like, you'll often have a similar opinion in Nicaragua, in Bolivia, and these other, like in Venezuela, and these other Latin American countries that have leftist governments. And even Iran, when it comes to world affairs, Iran has the same opinion. A lot of these countries aren't like gung-ho. They're not actually happy that there's a war. In fact, this war is going to impact them in a negative way as well. Just because of possible, the rise in prices. whether it's oil prices, although that could benefit Venezuela, but rises in like food prices, these kinds of things that are a consequence of this war hurt developing countries more than countries in the global north. But that said, oftentimes, like, it's like the opposite of what we were talking about in the beginning of this episode, where there's like that social chauvinism that the third world it doesn't have the answer to anything because it's too weak and backwards. Actually, I really do like Cuba almost always has the right take.
Yeah.
Man, don't say that in the U.S. Glad she's not here. Oh, buddy. Dog's getting impatient. I did have one more clip I want to do for Twitch. I think my headache's getting to me. Had oral surgery this week, guys. I am a little bit low this week. I do plan on coming back strong the last week or so after I get through this. But YouTube, thank you so much for hanging out. Come check me out on Twitch. There's more stuff I can do over there. I just get strikes or suppressed on YouTube if I show this, so I'm gonna do the last couple things over there. Come hang out. I dropped a link recently. If you want to, I always do a little bit more over there because I get strikes and such on YouTube. But thanks for hanging out. Peace. Click the link. Come over to Twitch.